chaired by Íñigo del Guayo. Sorry, we've chaired by Íñigo del Guayo, professor in administrative law, University of Almeria, representative of the Spanish Association, and our participants are Berra Jal from Austria, Heshling O'Donoghue from Ireland, Catherine Bennett from Norway, Laura Mannati from Italy, Ernesto Bonafè from UK. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to moderate this panel, and I want to congratulate the Italian Association for Energy Law, and in particular our colleague Marilena De Focatis, and also the president of FELA, Vicente López Ibor. Well, you can see in the program the huge ambition of the program. There is a long list of issues we should be addressing in this panel, like the 22 guidelines on state aid for climate, environmental protection, and energy markets, natural gas, hydrogen, biomethane, biogas, offshore wind, the place and role of nuclear power, native hydrogen, green hydrogen, acceleration of renewable and authorization procedures in the EU, simplification of procedure, storage, gas, electricity, batteries, capacity market issue. And all this must be addressed in 45 minutes because Marinella said, Íñigo, please, 45, 50 minutes, no more. So this is very good that this ambition of the program goes parallel to the ambition of FELA, the ambition of the Italian Association. So it's a signal that we are in the right path, being ambitious of what we want to achieve to become somebody to which the EU institutions talk, and a group of lawyers to which the EU institution ask for opinion, ask for advice, etc., etc. So this is very good, and congratulations for the ambition. Of course, to organize things a little bit better, we, FELA, ask the members of this panel. All of them are so well-known people in the energy law area from different parts of Europe, well-known in academia, well-known in law practice. So I will make a very short introduction of all of them because they are very well-known among us. But we ask them to give us questions they will ask to answer about this list of issues. And I will start with Ben Rajal, who is well-known in this community of energy lawyers, partner at Schönherr in Austria. And let us start from one of the last issues of this list of subjects we want to discuss today. What do you think, Bernd, is the role of storage in the context of decarbonization and energy transition? And in particular, what are the current legal challenges for the deployment of storage?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm happy to be here. Thank you also, Marinella, Well, yes, I'm going to speak about energy storage, and I think you were asking about the role of energy storage in the context of decarbonization. I think energy storage, and especially battery storage, plays a very important role in the context of decarbonization and also energy transition. And the reason behind is rather obvious. Battery energy storage systems can store excess energy generating during peak times and release it during periods of low production or high demand. And this, of course, helps to balance the supply and demand, ensuring a stable and reliable energy supply in Europe. Storage systems can also be used for peak shaving, which involves actually reducing the amount of energy drawn from the grid during peak demand periods. And this not only helps to lower energy costs, but also reduces the need for peaking power plants, which are regularly less efficient and more polluting. And load shifting, on the other hand, involves shifting energy consumptions from off-peak times, further optimizing energy use and reducing constraints on the grid. And last but not least, of course, energy storage systems and battery storage can enhance grid stability by providing ancillary services to the network operators, such as frequency regulation, voltage support, and also spinning reserve. And these services are essential, of course, for maintaining the reliability and efficiency of the power grid, especially as the proportion of volatile renewable energy increases. You were asking also about the challenges for deployment of storages, battery storages, and I can say from practice there are a lot of challenges. So storage developers and operators frequently encounter obstacles and barriers when attempting to participate in electricity markets. And one significant issue is the ambiguity surrounding their eligibility and the technical prerequisites to connect to the grid. In certain countries, the regulatory framework is actually tailored exclusively to assets that either generate or consume electricity. So this specificity of the regulatory frameworks regularly exclude battery energy storage systems by not recognizing them as a separate asset class. And that's a big issue because this creates, of course, regulatory barriers. And consequently, the developers are left without clear guidance on how to classify their system, which is a critical step in gaining grid access. Moreover, there's a lack of clarity, which extends to the technical standards for grid connection that storage systems should comply with. So since regulations often do not explicitly address energy storage systems, it's uncertain which set actually of technical connection rules are applicable to these systems. And this regulatory uncertainty can, of course, hamper the integration of battery storage systems into the energy markets as operators may struggle to comply with standards that are not clearly defined and that may not even exist in some of the countries. On a positive note, there has been some progress in some countries by clarifying that battery storage systems should be considered either as electricity producers when they feed electricity into the grid, and they should be treated as energy consumers when they draw electricity from the grid when in charging times. And this implies that actually the battery storage operators should have equal access to the grid like the other market participant. And I think this is a very important step into the right direction. However, from my perspective, this dual classification, generators on the one hand, consumers on the other hand, I think this classification does not fully account for the unique functionalities of battery storage systems. So for instance, we have seen the issue of double charging of network fees, which actually means that grid fees are levied for both the injection of the electricity and also the withdrawal of the electricity. And it would be therefore, in my opinion, reasonable to recognize battery energy storage systems as a separate asset class, which is governed by a tailor-made regulatory regime that, for instance, exempts battery storage systems from certain network charges in order to avoid double charging.
Thank you. Very interesting, all these ideas. And now, within this big context of several issues, we move. This is also a way of keeping attention from the audience. We move from storage to decarbonization of the gas sector. And in this occasion, we have the benefit of having among the speakers of Aislinn O'Donoghue, who is a Senior Associate in Energy, Infrastructure and Natural Resources in A&L Goodbody LLP Ireland. So,
thank you, Inigo. That's excellent pronunciation of a Gaelic name, so well done. Good morning, everyone, and it is great to be here this morning, and thank you to Marinella and to Edison for hosting us. I'm just going to bring a little bit of a perspective from Ireland today, and you know, it's great to be here sort of learning about the European law and regulation and listening to peers. One of the interesting things about working in a law firm, I suppose, is you get to see how a lot of the European law and regulation plays out in the context of business decisions. And there have been a lot of efforts in Ireland to decarbonize the gas network over the last number of years. So just to contextualize Ireland's energy mix for you, about 55% of our electricity needs actually come from the gas sector. So in that way, there is a huge need to decarbonize our electricity. And like other countries in Europe, we have we have very laudable and lofty goals, 80% renewable electricity by 2030. But then how do you achieve that, and how is the government really and the policymakers actually supporting an environment that allows companies to really implement that ambition? So I think there have been a few helpful developments in Ireland over the last number of years. The first is around the biomethane strategy in Ireland. So our government has published a strategy to help sort of spur a biomethane production industry in Ireland. And a couple of very interesting things are happening there. So by 2030, we have a target of increasing biomethane in our network by about 10%. So if you look at the various activities within the market, Gas Networks Ireland, who is our transmission system operator, has recently issued a PIN notice. So they're looking to procure about 25% of their annual needs for shrinkage gas from biomethane, which should have a huge impact on the industry. You're seeing a lot of corporate off-takers, so people who are working in the pharmaceutical and technology industries who have large energy needs actually go out now and they're looking to procure biomethane for their gas needs. So we have an interesting dynamic in Ireland where I think going forward, in order to connect to the grid, be it for electricity or for gas needs, you will need to show how you are going to achieve sort of a renewable quotient. And being able to demonstrate that will actually prioritize you in the queue in terms of getting connected into the system. So you have corporates who are looking at this from a sort of a business and strategic perspective, and also as part of their ESG needs. There's a huge proliferation of AD plant developers in Ireland who are building out AD plants across the country in order to facilitate biomethane. So there's a lot of activity, interestingly, but what we don't have in Ireland is a dedicated support scheme like you might have in other jurisdictions for offtake. So the government did announce as part of their strategy a capital grants program, and then we will also have a renewable heat obligation going into the end of the year. But a lot of it is at the moment being driven by individual companies and projects, rather than there being a dedicated offtake revenue stream. Another area that is interesting is hydrogen. There's a hydrogen strategy in Ireland, but I think that it is probably a longer term play. It's not where the medium term low hanging fruit is. Our focus in Ireland would be on green hydrogen. And I think there are some interesting projects at the moment. So BOC Gases, who is a subsidiary of Linde Engineering, is working very closely with some of the existing wind farms in Ireland in order to see could they put electrolyzers into wind farms in order to produce green hydrogen, and basically making use of existing infrastructure in order to when there's excess wind or renewables on the system, could they produce green hydrogen? So you're definitely seeing the early innings around hydrogen, but I think we have probably a ways to go in terms of sort of realizing actual projects and developments, across the country.
Thank you very much. A very interesting and complete overview of decarbonization in Ireland. And now from these two distinguished lawyers from Austria and Ireland, we move into academia. With Professor Catherine Banet, who is also very well known into the energy law community, and apart from being an energy law professor in Oslo University, she's the director of the Center for Energy Law of the Faculty of Law and Transition. And I would like to ask her about the Renewables Directive, a wider issue covering most of the list of issues we have in the panel, and how that directive will push into speeding up the procedure to build new renewable infrastructure, and how do you foresee the implementation of that RED III into member states? Please.
Thank you very much, Inigo, for the kind introduction, and thanks to FLA as well and Marinella for invitation. I would also address this topic based on an upcoming report that have been drafting for the Center on Regulation in Europe, and where I'm co-director, and I was supported by Professor Donati when it comes to an Italian case study. So I would like to pick up some of the findings from this to answer your question. And the first issue that has been already raised before the REPowerEU in relation to Fit for 55 was the fact that we need to address permit granting procedures that are lengthy, complex, parallel, multiple, in order to speed up the building up of renewable energy generation. And when we talk about speeding up, it's really the full chain from generation to grid connection, grid reinforcement, as a major barrier for further deployment of renewable energy. And to address this, the European Commission put forward several proposals, notably in the Renewable Energy Directive, so that your question directly, with new provisions, reinforced provisions after the REPower EU plan, but as well in other pieces of legislation, the 10E regulation, we have already the emergency regulation from December 2022 going in the same direction, and different guidances that also have been updated recently in June this year about acceleration areas, about good practices to speed up permitting procedures and recommendation of auction design. So it's part of this really deep trend, but as well requirements around acceleration of permitting. And actually, it was last Thursday, the European Commission launched infringement procedures against several member states for lagging behind the implementation of these provisions. What are they about? They are about, to put a very short list, first the identification of go-to areas where they will be easier to build renewables, to as well have a better planning and mapping of the areas when we can't build. Given special status to a renewable energy sources project, opening for prioritization of these projects compared to other projects, which will be challenging. You need to pick up the project compared to others, on which criteria, time limit for permitting procedures, simplification of permitting, including impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, digitalization of permitting procedures, staffing, as well as judicial review and dispute settlement that could be also more specialized to address renewable energy projects. So what the report does, and it's really about to come out, is to point out some of the implementation challenges based on this mapping of all the new requirements in the legislation. Not proposing to do anything more, we already have to digest all the new requirements, but looking at what kind of implementation challenges and putting some recommendation of how to improve that. So just going through some of these challenges. The first one that was discovered through the research was defining permit granting procedure in itself. Where does it start and where does it end? That's not obvious. And that has been reinforced in the Renewable Energy Directive latest revision. And so the fact that you have a precise definition of the scope is very challenging. Also because in the RED 3, it covers all relevant administrative procedures. So it's an open-ended list. And it will vary from a project to another one. So here, the regulatory authorities, the permitting authorities, will be the one putting really the starting point to when they receive a complete application. So that the ones that will deem the application complete. First challenge. The second implementation challenge is the interplay between planning and permitting. We can definitely support more speeding up of the permitting if we have a good planning. So there is an interesting interplay here, which also requires consistency between the project, the priorities, the criteria in the project application, and the objective of the planning. The third implementation challenge relates to the fact that we have parallel permitting procedures, and we need to look at the life cycle of a project development. It's not only generation plus grade, etc., plus investment. And if we miss that, then it will stop at some point. So better coordination and why not integration of some of these permitting procedures, as we see in some countries. And next is the differences in repartition of competences between permitting authorities that will vary from legal tradition to another one. And that's subject to subsidiarity. You're not interfering with the organization of administrative law, etc. But that's a practical challenge to implement all these EU measures. The prioritization of renewable energy projects that I mentioned earlier, that's something that needs to be as well interpreted, and where good practices will play a role as well, giving priority status to one project, including for judicial review. How is that going to be organized? And actors need predictability. And two last points relate first to the balancing between all the exemption regimes and providing some safeguards, because we have seen many examples, including for other sectors like floating FSRUs for LNG, for nuclear energy. There have been a series of acceleration measures adopted where exemptions have been granted to environmental rules, to public consultation, etc. So we need further clarification as to the safeguards, that what we cannot derogate from, safety, public consultation, etc. And to provide additional guarantee for the actors as well and the authorities, because maybe an investor will be a bit reluctant if they know that a big exemption has been provided and could be a risk of litigation. And finally, a last challenge when it comes to implementation of this measure relates to the balance between the common rules and the very project or technology specific rules. And there are many deadlines that are technology specific for PV, for wind, etc. So here we have in a phase 2 parallel as well manner to manage speeding up that could be very complex in the implementation. So for summarizing, that's the list of the challenges, and now it's up to the member states to implement them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for this very comprehensive and detailed analysis of the problem. And now we move into a surprise, because the energy transition is bringing us into many surprises, and one of them is that nuclear debate is coming back. And not only that, it's coming back in Italy, where nuclear power was decided by the people of Italy in 1973, I guess, not to have it. But for this discussion in energy law, we have Professoressa Amananti, who is a professor in economic law at the University of Milan, a member of the Italian Association for Energy Law. So please, could you please tell us about the relevance of nuclear energy to pave the way of decarbonization and to counterbalance the renewables in a more resilient energy mix?
Thank you for this question. But first of all, let me say that except Italy, but nuclear energy was one of the main topics at the beginning of the European Community, because the treaty of the European Treaty for atomic energy was issued at the same time as the European Community Treaty. And then, but later, the story is complex, and maybe this new round of nuclear energy is pushed by different reasons and different characteristics of the energy systems, current energy systems. So. Talking about decarbonization, I will go back to Draghi's report that has been recalled many times in these 2 days. And in the report, decarbonization is seen as a great opportunity for the European energy market and European decarbonization. However, the report affirms that after the crisis driven by the invasion of Ukraine, a future crisis might be driven by the need to deal with bottlenecks in electrification and the intermittency of the system. So, considering the electrification process, in addition to the electrification of end-user consumptions, transport, and so on. A main aspect is the energy consumption of digital technologies, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on, so that data centers consume enormous amount of electricity. It's not surprising, a news that I've read in newspapers, that Microsoft would reopen 3 Mile Island we know the story of Three Mile Island in the for the nuclear energy. And in this context, Microsoft made a deal to restart, to help to restart the power plant. So we know, so the decarbonization we have seen many times involves a shift to cleaner technologies, an increase obviously in the share of renewables in the total mix, and new low carbon technologies to achieve the objective of climate neutrality by 2050. So the share of clean energy in the total mix should be expected around 75 in 2040, from around 30% today. And as explained by De Fontanelle yesterday, the Article 194 of the Functioning Treaty has been used to support member states in choosing the different energy sources to define the mix they prefer. But hence, the approach to the EU decarbonization doesn't follow a one-size-fits-all model. And so we can observe currently different approaches. On the one side, France is not important that I explain what are the characteristics of these systems. On the other side, maybe Germany that decided to exit from the nuclear sector. But all in all, let me say that Draghi's report underscores that the EU competitiveness could be enhanced also by fostering the large development of clean energy sources such as renewables and nuclear. So we know that currently nuclear energy is used only in 12 member states. As it was said yesterday, Poland has started implementing a program aimed, if I'm not mistaken, at opening a power plant in around a decade, more or less. Actually, in 2023, the production of nuclear energy in the EU accounted for around 23% of the EU total electricity production. By contrast, in 2004, the amount was 34%. Facing such a contest, many voices rising from different organizations, including Draghi's report, underline the relevance of new nuclear for the future. Alongside renewables and the other low carbon technologies, it can contribute to achieve the EU's climate objectives and ensure a more reliable supply. In general, nuclear energy scene is described as a source which is neutral in the output of greenhouse gases, non-intermittent, obviously, and with limited dependency risks. Nonetheless, new nuclear, that is the new generation, I try to explain the new generation of reactors, including small modular reactors, whose deployment is not immediate, but is expected from the next decade onwards, maybe. This new generation of reactors could play a fundamental role in integrated energy systems with a widespread, as we know, penetration of renewables.
Professoressa, mi scusi, ma
Yes.
dobbiamo...
Yes, I try to speed up. So I can say that globally there is a growing interest in these new reactors because of their manufacturers can be standardized and the environmental footprint is significantly reduced in comparison with the large power plants. So the Draghi's report makes no explicit option for a specific technology. This is an interesting topic. But in my opinion, what emerges is the dimension of time, the urgency not to waste time in sector of energy, as Biandrino underscored in his speech yesterday. So this development, in conclusion, can be carried out also under the EU Commission umbrella, I could say, that recently launched the European Industrial Alliance on Small Modular Reactors to coordinate especially stakeholders cooperation at EU level. Only a brief conclusion. In a more institutional perspective, it is suggested that the national nuclear regulators must be supported to develop a common framework for standardization and for regulatory sandboxes, aimed especially at ensuring a smooth licensing process and helping to reduce site-specific costs as well as risks for investors. Thank you. Sorry for...
No. Thank you very much, because you address both the traditional role of nuclear law for the future and new ways of nuclear energy, like the small modular units. So thank you very much, Professoressa Amanati. And now we move to our final member of the panel, Dr. Ernesto Bonafé, who combines both academic life together with experience in practice, because before working in the University of Dundee, he worked many years as a law advisor at the Energy Charter Treaty in Brussels, and before in the Florence School of Regulation. So Ernesto is both Spanish, both Italian, and now British. Please, could you please, Ernesto, tell us about what are the legal and policy approaches of the EU towards hydrogen, green hydrogen, or renewable?
Grazie Inigo, grazie Marinella, grazie Vicente. Mi fa molto piacere essere qua a Milano, Palazzo Edison, in questa conferenza. And to address the question about the development of a hydrogen market in the European Union, let me remind you something that in the 90s, when the liberalization of the electricity and gas sector started, the starting point was vertically integrated companies, generation, transmission, distribution, and retail. So to develop a market, an internal market, there was a need to liberalize, so to distinguish monopolistic activities, network activities from competitive activities, generation and supply. And both electricity and gas went in parallel. Now the idea is to create a market, and the starting point is basically zero, is to create a market from scratch. There is the use of fossil fuel-based hydrogen, but it's nothing comparable, like it's not at the scale of the ambition of the European Union that is expecting for the hydrogen-based economy. There are very good reasons for a hydrogen-based economy or energy sector. So first of all, decarbonization to meet the climate targets by 2030, 2050. Then another very good reason is to end dependency on fossil fuels, particularly imports from Russia. And another reason to develop hydrogen is the need to reindustrialize Europe around clean technologies, in particular hydrogen. We saw in the presentation before developments in India, China, United States, but also Japan, Canada. So Europe is facing competition from these global actors in the deployment of new technologies, industrial development, economic growth, and jobs. So how the European Union can create a hydrogen market from scratch? This conference is focusing on the powers of the European Union, 194 of the Lisbon Treaty, but there is also a need of a close alignment, coordination between all layers, all actors, so the European Union, the European Commission, member states, and the industry. And it started quite well, because from the very beginning that the European Union, the European Commission adopted a strategy on hydrogen with production targets, then there was a positive welcome from the industry, from member states. Then this ambition was increased following REPower EU. So not only the ambition was to produce hydrogen in the European Union, but also to import from third partner countries. And that sent a very strong and positive signal, even if they were non-binding targets contained in communications strategy, the hydrogen strategy and the REPower EU, in a way that was sufficient to set the direction and to have a very positive reaction from countries and the industry. Not only that, there is the governance regulation on national climate and energy plans, where member states have to report on the measures adopted to comply with the climate obligations. So it's an excellent opportunity for the European Commission to know who is doing what and in which manner, at what pace. And the industry welcome also the targets and the adoption of the different pieces of legislation, in particular the delegated act on the definition of renewable hydrogen. It took 2 years of intense debate, but now it's published and it provided certainty, clarity, and the result was noted by the International Energy Agency. The number of projects that were announced following the adoption of this piece of legislation increased significantly. In only a couple of years, there is almost a complete legal framework for hydrogen. The commodity is not there, the market is not there, but the legal framework is there, which also tells us about the capabilities of the European Union to produce supranational, being detached from member states, but it can produce this framework for the future, even before the market exists. And there are examples in all areas affecting the development of a hydrogen market. There is this definition, as I mentioned, also the methodology to calculate the emission savings using the delegated act. So it's an executive power of the European Commission. There is also the possibility to establish an infrastructure, a cross-border infrastructure, thanks to the Trans-European Network regulation, with many projects related to hydrogen production, network storage, being recognized as of projects of common interest. There have been also measures to stimulate demand, because producing hydrogen is one part, but who is going to buy this premium product, this expensive product? So how to stimulate demand at the same time? The Renewable Energy Directive have been used for that purpose, and some specific regulations, the fuels for aviation, for maritime transport, have been also opportunities for the EU legislature to try to stimulate demand for renewable and low carbon hydrogen. But not only that, there is also the carbon pricing mechanisms, the ETS, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, to create a level playing field between green or renewable and low carbon hydrogen produced in Europe and outside. So how to put a price on carbon that helps to develop the hydrogen economy. Other challenges permitting that have been mentioned in this panel. So the European Commission used the review of the national climate and energy plans to issue guidance on how permitting at national level could be accelerated. Moreover, state aid, there are many sets or categories of state aid, the important projects of common interest, climate, environment, and energy guidelines, the transition and the crisis framework state aid that were adopted following the war in Ukraine, exemption, the general block exemption of state aid. So every single area of energy law has been activated, has been reviewed, updated to create a new hydrogen market, including also the development, the manufacturing of supply chains with adoption of the Net Zero Industrial Act. This is for the legal framework, but there is also a lot of funding programs across the EU that have been mobilized to assist, to support the development of a renewable hydrogen market. Of course, first of all, the role is for the private sector. It is expected that by creating a market, the private sector will finance the bulk of investment needed to deploy a value chain. But still, the estimated amount of EU funding for the years 21-27 is almost 20 billion euros of taxpayer money to create a hydrogen market. Most of this money, more than 70%, will come from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, funded by the Next Generation Europe. Another important source of funding is Innovation Fund, where the projects are selected by the Executive Agency on Climate, Energy and Infrastructure. and it's funded by the ETS revenues. But there is more funding, modernization fund, cohesion fund,
Dr. Bonafé.
European investment, government, and I finish because the list continue on all the programs that have been mobilized to assist in the creation of this market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all 5 members of this panel. They are all very, very good experts in the area. If you would ask me something in common from these different aspects, from electricity storage to biomethane and biogas in Ireland, speeding up the permitting procedure, nuclear and hydrogen, if you would ask me for something which puts these things together, is that all this area of the energy transition needs law. Law becomes an instrument to achieve these transition objectives. And this is where regulation comes into scene. And the climax comes in the hydrogen area where there is no market, there is no commodity, but there is regulation, and this regulation is intended to create that market. So now we move to a second round of questions, but for the sake of order, no, okay. We still have time, no? So, okay, that gives us some relax. I have a second question for you all. So now we have another 50 minutes. Yes, and I see this. I see this second round as a way of introducing new subject, but also to wrap up the main ideas you want to convey to the audience. And the first question, of course, goes to Bernd Rajal, and I would ask him, what do you think the EU needs to be done at the EU level to support and accelerate storage deployment?
Yes, I think can answer that as a follow-up to my previous information provided. I think we need harmonization. We need harmonized rules for technical connection, for instance. We need harmonized definition of different storage asset classes in order to really build up a functioning integrated market when it comes to storage system. And the second thing is what we see in practice is one of the major challenges for battery storage, especially for large battery storages, is there is no business case. There's a strong case, there's a need for storage, but still there is no business case. When you see the economic assessment of big projects, they come up to the conclusion it's just not bankable at the moment, and that's a big issue for deployment. So this is why I think it will be really important, also similar to the hydrogen sector, that the EU needs to establish funds for battery storage systems so that the member states could provide investment aids to storage systems in order to make these projects happen. Still, they will be difficult because just an CapEx support at the beginning is good, but maybe not enough in order to cover also the OpEx expenses. So, I think that would be a very important step. And actually under the recovery RRP planning, there are funds available already for battery storage systems. So me personally, I'm advising for instance, the Bulgarian government on establishment of competitive auctions for battery storage systems. So they get funded by up to 50% of the CapEx. So that's, I think, a very important step into the right direction. But I think more needs to be done in terms of funding, at least as long the projects are barely bankable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernd. And now I may go back to some of the issues you discussed, but let us see how we managed to give the voice to the rest of the panelists. Aislinn, can you please talk us about the developments in renewables in Ireland?
Yeah. Maybe just in Ireland, we've chatted a little bit about, we're relying on gas for 55% of our electricity needs. But one of the interesting things also in Ireland is that in any given day, you could have 80% renewables penetrating on the grid, which is the highest in the world, or at least it was last year. Maybe someone somewhere has beaten us. But you have a very developed onshore wind and onshore solar market in Ireland. But I think where there is a lot of excitement and a lot of interest in Ireland is actually in offshore wind. And that's going to be a huge part of the transition through to 2050. So in a country like Ireland, our sea mass is actually 7 times the size of the land mass. So there's no reason why we shouldn't have a very active offshore wind sector. But unfortunately, I think we've fallen behind our UK colleagues and are very much at the infancy of our offshore wind industry in Ireland. But there have been some very positive developments. So over the last number of years, we have effectively 2 different phases of projects. We have targets to build 5 gigawatts, to have 5 gigawatts installed by 2030, and then to have 20 gigawatts installed by 2040. So, practically speaking on the ground, we have a support system, which is a CFD-based system in Ireland, the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, which has received state aid approval. And we have 4 projects, 4 out of the 6 projects that are actually well progressed have come through that auction and are currently in the process of currently in the planning process in Ireland. And what is interesting is the average weighted price, I think, for that auction was something like €86, whereas onshore, you're seeing prices close to 100. So there are certainly questions, I think, from people in the industry around deliverability. But a lot has happened, I think, in the last number of years in order to bring projects through the process. And there's been a lot of international investment, including by EDF, who are supporting the Codling project, which will be one of the largest in the country if it comes to fruition, about 1.5 gigawatts or so. So there's certainly a lot that has happened. I think sort of moving out into the future, we are moving from what we call a developer-led system, where people could site their projects around the country, to a developer-led system, or to a state-led system, pardon, which effectively will see the government choosing regions around the country where it makes sense to site offshore wind projects and where there is proximity to either grid connection or to the population. So we're at the beginning, and I think just to put it in context, I mean, maybe the UK has 12 gigawatts or so of installed capacity offshore at the moment, and they have had an industry for maybe the last 20 years, but we're trying to get to 5 by 2030. So I don't think it's lost on us, the amount of work that needs to happen, but it's certainly going to be a key piece, as we look out into, 2050.
Thank you very much. It's a very good comparison between the UK and Ireland, yes, to show us the... Before giving the voice to Catherine Bannett, I would like to make a very brief remark about how EFELA is the result of cooperation between several national associations, and then EFELA, in turn, is cooperating with other institutions, political institutions, and other associations in the world. And I would like to mention that we have today a Catherine Bannett, who is member of the Academic Advisory Group of the International Bar Association, the section on energy and natural resources law. And we have the president of the section here among the audience, Matthias Lang. So I wanted just to highlight how good is this cooperation between these 2 institutions, the EFELA and the IBA section on energy and natural resources law. Catherine, please, Could you please develop a little bit further about how the treaty on functioning of the EU guarantees sovereignty over energy mix for member states? How is that the case in practice?
Thank you. And I would like also to acknowledge you as former chair of the AAG group, and thank you for your leadership on that. It's interesting to have a reflection today as this interaction and some types of friction between the principles we have in the treaty concerning sovereignty over energy mix and the more technology-specific policies and requirements that we find at the EU level. Would it be, we mentioned hydrogen, we mentioned nuclear energy, that will be a big question for the next commission. We mentioned offshore wind, renewable gases. So all very prescriptive approach when it comes to developing more specific technologies at the European level. And this is closely tied to a topic that have been mentioned several times already, is competitiveness, industrialization, and strategic autonomy around the building of some value chains with access to raw materials. So thinking about how do we balance the need to preserve sovereignty over energy mix and the free choice of these energy sources versus the need to cooperate and to have a strategic planning around the development of this value chain. That's why I wanted to address that topic that will be of increasing importance for the decarbonization, but as well for retaining workplaces in Europe. And that also requires thinking about how to develop these strategic value chains. The Net Zero Industry Act is a very important act to that respect, which also balances the need to focus on certain strategic technologies, decarbonization strategy, and we have a list. There were 6 at the beginning. Now we have an open list with 19. With a menu of different technologies, and the member states are free to choose among that. And at the same time to make sure that we collaborate to enable these strategic value chains. So that is something that I believe will structure very much both the discussion, new initiative, but as well tensions between the member states for a new commission. And I will stop here in the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Professoressa Amanati, could you please tell us your thoughts, your views about the role of EU institutions and regulations to promote policies aimed at developing a sustainable nuclear energy production?
So, I try to give only a list of the increasing number of legislative measures that now include nuclear energy. First of all, I recall the very famous taxonomy legislation. There are, we have seen yesterday that there are a lot of criticism that arise now about the inclusion of nuclear energy in the list of do not significant harm criteria. This is the first, and I mean, is maybe one of the most important measures where nuclear energy is mentioned. The second is the new design of the energy market, where is decided to support schemes of investment. You have seen in the previous roundtable the meaning of these contracts and so on. The third important, in my opinion, measures is the regulation where there are measures for strengthening production of zero emission technologies. And then also in this legislation, nuclear energy is mentioned. In my opinion, so we have to see also the European context in the international and global framework because we can recall the agreement at COP28 among 22, if I'm not mistaken, countries. What I retain crucial and important in this moment is the relevance of the reports and guidelines issued, designed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, especially the so-called milestones approach that was updated considering the new technology of the SMR. And the agency has put in place also two interesting interconnected mechanisms, the platforms of SMR and the so-called nuclear harmonization and standardization initiatives, which obviously focuses on more standardized industrial approaches. But in conclusion, what I can say is that the role of maybe in the future, on the next future of the European institutions. So on the one side, this role seems mainly aimed at enhancing the relevance of nuclear energy as a source of zero greenhouse emissions and as a net zero emission technology. On the other side, first of all, the Commission seems to invest in creating a new technological and regulatory framework by means thanks to the cooperation between the different member states, industry and utilities, and in supporting the inclusion of nuclear energy in the energy mix of the member states. Thank you.
Thank
That's
you,
all.
Professor Etza. Very, very nice conclusion. And now, Ernesto, please, can you tell us what are the lessons we can learn from the current EU law and policy towards green hydrogen?
So the lessons learned so far, considering that in my previous answer I talk about targets, a legal framework almost complete, and lots of available EU funding programs, everything to stimulate the deployment of hydrogen. So we make a reality check is that first the targets are too ambitious, they are not realistic, and basically it's because they were politically driven, industry driven, which can be explained also because when the targets were set a couple of years ago, there was not a definition of renewable hydrogen. The market was inexistent, and then some technological assumptions had to be made. So in a way, these aspirational targets went too far. But at the same time, there is not always consistency in the approach from the European Commission. There are different, if I can say, agendas within the European Commission, services. There is DG Energy dealing with energy supply, but there is also DG Grow dealing with value chains. Plus, there are different visions on the role of low carbon hydrogen. So basically hydrogen produced with natural gas, with carbon capture and storage. But there is natural gas, and the objective of this hydrogen economy is to end dependency on fossil fuels. So this debate is not settled within the European Commission services. I also mentioned before that member states have to adopt national climate and energy plans, which provide an opportunity for the European Commission to know what member states are doing. But that's all. The European Commission cannot impose national targets, the national sovereignty. The European Commission cannot develop national strategies for hydrogen. So the result is that the existing national targets and strategies are not aligned with the European strategy and targets. And for the industry, the reality check is to face the chicken and egg problem. So supply is waiting for demand to develop and vice versa. So, as I said, the objective is to create a market from scratch, an expensive one. So who starts, supply or demand? The idea is to stimulate both at the same time. But the impact of the legal framework is still uncertain. And the main reason is because when the European Commission adopted a definition of renewable hydrogen, it was made without an impact assessment on costs. What are the costs of producing renewable hydrogen? Nobody knows. First, why it's important to define green hydrogen? Because otherwise, renewable power would be used to produce hydrogen, and the grid would be filled with fossil fuel generation. So to avoid the risk that renewable hydrogen incentivize fossil fuel generation, it's important to establish criteria. The main criteria is additionality. So to produce hydrogen with new renewable power that otherwise would not be produced. And then there is also a correlation, a temporal and geographic correlation. To fulfill these strict and complex criteria, there is increase of costs because hydrogen producers have to develop large electrolyzers, to develop storage, and even pipelines to bring gas from elsewhere to comply with the correlation and additionality criteria. So all that has been in place without a proper impact assessment on costs. This is why it's uncertain if the European Union can be proud of the capacity to establish a legal framework, but there is uncertainty about the impact of this legal framework. There is also sometimes the disconnection between the European and national level. Member states are competent, have the last word on state aid. State aids were amended, as I said before, but the level of state aid and the provision of state aid is decided by member states. Same for permitting. The European can issue guidance to accelerate permitting, but the organizational and administrative aspects of permitting are on the hands of member states. So member states have to follow suit to accomplish these objectives. I mentioned before also the carbon pricing mechanisms, but the effects of this will not be immediate, will be maybe from 2026, and some aspects have been not included, some aspects of the hydrogen derivatives that could also benefit from this. So there are reasons for, to conclude that the legal framework has been partially successful in the sense that has been deployed, most of it, but it's uncertain, the impact that will have on the market. And then for the last aspect, for the funding part, the astonishing fact is that the European Commission has not a clear overview of the investment needed in hydrogen, both supply and demand, and the public funding, European and national, that is available. So how to create a market without knowing how much is needed and how much is available. So this is the situation of the hydrogen sector in Europe. Plus, investors are struggling with so many programs, so many rules, that they are creating confusion and is not helping. There are attempts to straightforward these procedures with the creation of another body, the European Hydrogen Investment Bank, European Hydrogen Bank, and to act as a one-stop shop, but still is not delivering. As a result, there is no guarantee that the public funding will allow to harness the potential of renewable hydrogen in Europe. So what is happening so far is that the projects and the funding is going to countries where there is a high share of hard to decarbonize sector. So the funding is being concentrated in a few countries, in a few sectors. But the objective is to create a market allowing cross-border trade between the states, to make sure that the renewable energy, the renewable hydrogen can be produced. That implies that there is sufficient renewables. So there is a lack of maybe a lack of consistency between the amounts of renewables and the in a particular country and the expectation to create green hydrogen. Plus, to facilitate trade, there is a need to develop a European interconnected infrastructure network. So there is, just to conclude, that the targets are very ambitious. Europe is far to achieve them. The legal framework has an uncertain impact on the development of the market, and there is no guarantee that the public funding available will harness the potential. So that's the reality check.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting conclusions, Ernesto, about the legal framework for hydrogen. I wonder where we are, Marinella. Are we in the position of allowing questions from the audience, or a question from the moderator, or questions from a fellow General Secretary? Okay, thank you. I'm sure there are questions from the audience, and before they come into steam, before I see hands up asking for questions, let me ask Bern a question about electricity storage. We have had in July this year in Spain a decision of the regulator allowing a distributor to reject access of storage on the basis that storage installations are, as you are clearly explained, both generation installations and demand installations. But to analyze the capacity of the network from a demand side, the distributor applied the rule of maximum use of the network. So if you do that, there will be no room for storage. So what is your view on this?
Well, this is a network issue. Of course, the network operators need to check if the capacity of the storage is compatible with the network capacities. But I think there would be maybe a potential solution for that, and that is something which is actually reflected in the new electricity directive, which is the so-called flexible network access. So flexible network access is that actually you get a network connection agreement on the maximum capacity, also for battery storage, but still the network operators is allowed, you know, to somehow limit the capacity then. And I think this would be a possible way to integrate a battery storage system also in these scenarios where the network capacity is maybe not sufficient in order to fully integrate the storage.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Chiara Petruzzo.
If you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Chiara Petruzzo, Board of Appeal of Acer. I have a question for Ernesto about the renewable hydrogen legislation. You said, and I was not aware of this, that there was no impact assessment for this piece of legislation. So it's not really a question, it's more about a reflection, but I see that apart from all the concerns you have highlighted about this legal framework, I see a great potential for litigation, because if there is no impact assessment with such an impactful legislation, that seems to be another big concern.
Go ahead, and then.
Thank you, Chiara. Very important question. So why there was no an impact assessment? So the reason is because a delegated act, which is an executive act by the European Commission, does not need an impact assessment. This delegated act is based on the Renewables Directive that when it was proposed, it came with an impact assessment. But this precise legal provision, this article in the Renewables Directive, was only included later in the negotiations between the Parliament and the Council. So it was not at the beginning of the proposal, and it was not covered by the impact assessment. So it went on until to have a definition of renewable hydrogen without an impact assessment for this reason. And so that I want to clarify that, but I'm not sure if I answer your question. Yes. Okay. Yeah, what will happen is that in a few years, the Commission will have to make an assessment to review the implementation of the delegated act, and that will be an opportunity to make the impact assessment that was missing from the beginning. So the impact assessment will come when reviewing the delegated act, when reviewing the directives or different pieces of legislation, but has not been there from the beginning.
Thank you, Ernesto. And now we have a question from Matthias Lang. They are bringing you a microphone.
Thank you. It's an observation on battery storage that Bernd mentioned. I think in many countries we've been talking about battery storage first and some projects built, and when they came online, they were basically priced out of the market. There is now, in some countries, one country I know is Germany, without a specific support regime for batteries. There are significant battery storage systems being built, projected and financed by banks without a separate support regime. And I think that that's a development to think about. I'm not sure how it's going to work. I think in the UK we had some projects that were built that way, that as much as we like public support schemes, because in particular the renewables industry, I think, grew up on state aid, maybe battery can do it without. So I'm not sure if that's going to be true. We'll have to see how this works and what the experience in the different countries is. But it seems to be at the moment that banks are willing to finance it. And an important part of it seems to be that the revenue stream is diverse. And there's a new industry coming up, I think, is the optimizers for revenue streams for battery storage systems, so that they either do merchant trades or they work in the reserve market, frequency stabilization or whatever. So maybe there is a way to do it without it. So it's, I don't know what your observation is in other countries.
Yeah, my observation is a different one, but you're right. I mean, there are good practice examples also from Germany and UK where it works without support. But in most of the European countries, especially in the Eastern European countries, it does not work. And there's a lot, there's actually the largest need for storage capacities because the network capacities are very weak in order to integrate more renewables. And there we see this issue, and also we see in the market observations that projects are actually not bankable with any supports in terms of investment aids, in terms of CapEx support at the beginning. But there are positive examples, you're right, maybe we can do it in another way, but this then depends, I mean, that would be interesting maybe to go into more detail. This again depends on the national regulatory framework. I don't know how the revenues are generated, for instance, in Germany. Is this by providing ancillary services? And are there special tariffs? Is there a special tariff scheme for that, which gives confidence to the investors that they get a sufficient return on investments by providing ancillary services, for instance? Or is it possible, for instance, to participate in both market segments, so maybe they can participate in the market for ancillary services at the same time also in energy arbitrage? I don't know. So this would be maybe also options to frame or design the frameworks in a way that there is a market for that and that there is a stable revenue stream on the investment.
Quick response. There actually is no guarantees for the investors. Yes, you can participate in the auctions for the frequency part. So the reserve capacity, primary, maybe secondary reserve. And depending on how you set up the units, if you have the big ones, they actually act in the different markets. So both they can do the merchant play and the reserve market, the regulated markets. Then you actually have a pre-qualification procedure, but there is no specific support regime for battery storage. It just makes use of the existing scheme that is available to the others.
Please.
Just following up, it is not really a question to the panel, but following up this discussion, very interesting discussion on storage. I think we can just mention the Italian experience. We are, let's say, leading in time, not in substance, leading in time in terms of having storage, some supporting scheme. For example, in our capacity market, which is the opposite of the renewable things, we have admitted some storage. And then we have, beginning of 2025, large batteries already, let's say, supported by the capacity market scheme. Their revenue stream is a mix. One is on the market, and they will go for arbitration between the day-ahead market and the, let's say, adjustment markets in order to have some market revenues independently from the, let's say, system service. And then they have some additional revenue streams coming from the adequacy, let's say, target through the capacity market. Now we have, let's say, a forthcoming support scheme, which is called MAXI, I don't know if it was mentioned this morning, as MACSE, which is really a support scheme just making services to the network, let's say the transmission network. And because in our case, in Italy, we discovered that just with the market alone, the business scheme for storage is not flying. So we would like to have these two, let's say, alternative scheme. One is a mixed one with capacity market and some market revenues, if you may. And the second one is completely a support scheme, which is relevant to Terna, which is a transmission operator. But I should say that Italy is leading in time in this experimentation. And so also one thing more, we would like just to be as much as technology neutral as we can. And so not only batteries are on our horizon, but maybe, especially for Italy in the southern part. And here we are in Edison, which is an operator very, very keen to have this technology with the pumping storage, pumping power plant.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are many other questions from the audience and from members of the panel, but Marinella is now flagging and saying you must finish. Thank you very much for the members of this panel for your very interesting responses to my questions. And
So thank you, Inigo. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Laura, Bern, Ernesto. And now let's continue the conference with the keynote speech of Filippo Donati. Is this the time for lunch? No. Is this the time for European solidarity in the energy sector? Over to you.
So thank you, Marinella. Thanks to EFLA. Thanks to Edison for this invitation. And it's a great honor for me to address a problem which is essential to the future of Europe, solidarity in the energy field, but also a responsibility. I'm the last obstacle between you and lunch, so I will try not to take too much time. So the question I've been asked to address is this the time for European solidarity in the energy sector? And the answer, in my opinion, is clearly yes. Louis de Fontanelle yesterday explained to us in his remarkable keynote speech that the principle of energy solidarity is enshrined in Article 194 of the Treaty on the Functioning of European Union. It is true, and Catherine Barnett warned us that there's a paragraph in this provision providing that member states remain sovereign in the choice of their energy mix. However, it is a principle of solidarity which imposed to interpret, and the European Court of Justice interpreted this provision as not impeding member states to adopt policy for general interest which may affect the energy mix of member states, for instance, decarbonization and also addressing energy crisis. And solidarity played an essential role during the last energy crisis of 2022. And today, while the energy crisis is over, solidarity remains an urgent necessity. And this urgency has been underlined by the Draghi report, which has highlighted the need to quickly overcome structural weaknesses of the European energy market and restore competitiveness in this crucial sector. Mario Draghi noted that member states are already acting individually and that industrial policies are on the rise. But, he warned, it is evident that Europe is falling short of what we could achieve if acted as a community. Therefore, I would like to structure my speech as follows. Initially, I will focus on the reasons why we still need more solidarity in the energy sector. Secondly, I will go on to the recommendations of the Mario Draghi report, and in my conclusive remarks, I will try to highlight some of the most significant obstacles toward European energy solidarity. So to fully appreciate why solidarity is so crucial, we must begin by acknowledging the dimensions of the crisis we are in. Many are the structural weaknesses of Europe and the reasons of the competitiveness gap vis-à-vis the USA and China. Lack of natural resources, insufficient infrastructure investment, different energy policies among member states. In addition, technological disparities across the Union in renewable energy generation, in grid modernization, in storage capacity, pose significant barriers to achieving a cohesive energy system. And these problems have worsened following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has confirmed Europe's deep vulnerabilities in energy supply. Our historical reliance on Russian gas and oil has proven to be not just an economic issue, but a matter of national security. This reliance has exposed Europe to supply disruptions, price shocks, and geopolitical blackmail. In response to the crisis, Europe has done very much. The REPower EU has outlined a plan for a strategy to boost Europe's energy independence while protecting customers from energy price hikes following the outbreak of the war. Despite this guidance, however, diverse have been the responses to energy crisis throughout Europe. Even after the crisis, member states remain fragmented in their approach to the outstanding structural energy issues we are facing. Each nation operates with its own regulations and apply different energy mix, which hinders the ability to act cohesively and to overcome price discrepancies and supply bottlenecks. In the absence of a coherent, united front, Europe risks moving too slowly and ineffectively to overcome its structural issues. European solidarity, therefore, is not a luxury, is a necessity. The Mario Draghi report, let's go to the report of Mario Draghi, highlights both the progress made, but also the structural weaknesses that still exist in the energy market. And it leaves no doubt, Europe is at a tipping point. The market is fragmented. There is price differences, not only between Europe and the US and China, but also among member states. During the crisis, Italy was one of the countries with the highest price, while, for instance, Sweden kept having very low prices in energy. Today, the transition to renewable energy remains inconsistent across the European Union, with some nations lagging far behind the others. The Green Deal has set very ambitious targets, but we need bold, immediate action, both at national level and at European level. For instance, the International Energy Agency warned that insufficient deployment of grids would limit the uptake of renewables and lead to an increase in emissions. And the Draghi report underlines the lack of adequate interconnectors between countries, particularly between regions with a surplus of renewable energy and those with higher demand. And of course, we need to guarantee security of supply in order to avoid being in the future affected by geopolitical development. We need to diversify our energy sources, to build strategic reserves that are shared across the Union. We could not afford to act individually when our security at European level is at risk. Also, Europe might exploit its collective bargaining power when negotiating with third parties' energy contracts, for instance, gas supply. This would allow Europe to secure more favorable terms and conditions in the contracts to reduce dependency on volatile regions and to protect consumers from, spikes in energy prices. So also an European diplomacy in energy would help. So let's go to the main obstacles toward the path to energy solidarity. Let's, indicate some of the most relevant. The first obstacle is political. Member states continue to guard their energy sovereignty fiercely. Some countries are more advanced in renewable energy deployments, while others remain heavily reliant on fossil fuels. We have seen the example of Ireland. Some countries rely on coal, others on nuclear energy, and still others on natural gas. Competing interests of individual member states fuel tension and slow progress toward collective goals. The second obstacle is geopolitical. Europe's energy market is not just shaped by internal dynamics, but by external forces as well. Instability, particularly in the Middle East, North Africa, and Russia, has the potential to create new crises. The third obstacle is economic. Achieving the goal outlined in the Draghi report requires massive investment in energy infrastructure, renewable projects, and innovation. While the European Union has committed significant funds, there is still a gap between what has been allocated and what is really needed. And at the end of the day, funding the transition will be a matter of state aid, and we will also need to relax our regulations on state aid and competition. And finally, we cannot underestimate the social impact of decarbonization. Replacing fossil fuels will impact certain regions and industries. A just transition for workers and communities that depends on traditional energy industries must be ensured. Solidarity means leaving no one behind. So let me conclude. Solidarity in the energy sector is not just an aspiration, it's an urgent necessity. In a world that faces unprecedented challenges from climate change and resource scarcity to geopolitical instability and economic equality, the need for collective action has never been greater. So the Draghi report offers a clear blueprint for what needs to be done. Now it's up to us, the task to turn this vision into reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Filippo, for a splendid presentation and speech. I agree fully with you with regard to this quote connected with solidarity in geopolitical terms. To some extent, solidarity means to geopolitics that integration means to markets in Europe. So I believe one coming from the treaties and that inspiration, and the others from the internal market or secondary legislation. But it's the moment to finish, and I don't want to enlarge, as you say, the conflict between having some lunch and ending this beautiful conference. Due parole italiano. Palazzo Edison, che porta il nome di una figura straordinaria nel settore energetico a livello universale. Una figura che insieme ad altri grandi innovatori, Mota, Volta, Colombo, ha reso possibile la magia dell'elettricità, contribuendo in modo decisivo allo sviluppo e alla modernizzazione della società nell'ultimo secolo e mezzo. We are, as I say, going to the end of the conference. And I would say that it has been a conference of contents that I very much enjoy during all the sessions, all the panels, and the participation of all the speakers, chairpersons, keynote speakers, all very, very deep on the subjects that we have treated. We have covered many things, and I believe even Inigo was saying to what extent it would be difficult to cover all the issues that it has been structured during the third session, and he was completely right. But I think at the same time it provokes this mobilization and dynamics of exchanges from one member of the panel to the others, and we have been talking, for instance, now about many questions. Just to connect with the question raised by Bern and answered by Matthias and some others on the auditorium, I would say that storage is a fascinating piece, because we all talk about storage as if we were just one single thing. And at the end of the day, it's an activity, it's a new one, the only new one activity in the whole of the legislative European package. Also in the recast formula is reinforced, but it's completely different utility scale, or in the demand side, or hydroelectric, or some other. So this makes the measure to what extent is interesting having this opportunity to exchange between ourselves about all this. But my words is of congratulations and gratitude to all of you. As I said, all the people and members of the executive committee, members of the FELA that have participated, invited guests to this event. I would very much thank also the Florence School of Regulation for his participation in our meeting. We, during our steering committee, executive committee, before the conference was open, we also approved to make an agreement with the Latin American Association of Energy Law, experts, so that I believe it would enrich our conversation and our debates. I think another question, yes, of content, and with this I would end, that is, and Catherine Bennett recalls this morning to all of us. That is opening up procedure of infringement with regard to the permitting case. That's very interesting let's say if we were in a business school as a business case, because we were talking during 2 years to what extent it's important to mobilize the permitting procedure and to have simplification formulas and so on to reduce deadlines and timeframes and so on. And at the end of the day, we have only one country, if I am right on that I believe is Denmark, that has accomplished the transposition process. So the rest of the countries lag behind, and we have a great problem with all this because the blocking, the infrastructures, all the calls that we have for investment, increasing capacity, and all these questions are stranded, particularly stranded because of this problem. Final personal message. The energy sector and industry is undergoing, and I am saying this with profound conviction, a great transformation. Not only for geopolitical reasons, that is, of course, very obvious, not only for reasons of security of supply, that is very much needed, as always, not only because of the political cycle that we are living through, particularly in the European institutions, but due to the impressive technological innovation that is penetrating in the sector. I'm fully convinced on this. Innovation does not wait for governments, companies, or regulators. It simply takes root and grows from the market with consumers' acceptance. And I believe on that sense, the telecom early example is so clear and so evident. Once again, thank you to you all. Looking forward to see you again in Budapest in the next conference. And we have a gift from the European Commission that it would be as the concluding remarks of this conference, that they had been so kind to send through his Director General of Legal Services, with whom we cooperate in a very fruitful way, Mr. Daniel Calleja. A final message. Unfortunately, he couldn't come, but he has been, as I said, so kind to send this message from video from his own Brussels office. Thank you so much indeed to all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished authorities, dear President of EFELA, Vicente López Ibor, it is an honor to address you in this closing session of the 4th Annual Congress of EFELA. I have been familiar with your work since your origins, and I have had the privilege of sharing reflections on the field of energy law with you on various occasions. I can say that in only 6 years, EFELA has become a point of reference. It's a very relevant organization as a stakeholder for the European Union. You provide an excellent platform for the exchange of experiences and for the analysis of the energy legal system. Your high-level experts forum plays a key role in assessing regulatory proposals, in facilitating communication, and in engaging with dialogue with the Member States and the European Union. And I know, even beyond the European Union, you are very active globally. I know you cooperate actively with ACIDE in the Ibero-American context, and you are an active member of these international networks. Let me say a few words about energy. Energy, as we all know, lies at the very heart of the European Union's history, but also of its legal system. The early European treaties from the outset with the coal and steel community included a significant energy dimension. And the European Court of Justice, since the landmark judgment in Costa versus Enel, recognized the principle of primacy of EU law in an early Italian case which involved an unpaid electricity bill. That is the origin of the principle of primacy, which has expanded later on, and it's one of the most important pillars of European law. Energy is today the backbone of the Union's industrial and productive strategy. Market liberalization, coupled with an intelligent regulatory framework, has provided transparency and efficiency, particularly in strategic sectors. And it has also paved the way for our internal energy market, which is decisive towards the integration and harmonization of the legislation of member states. The treaty clearly provides that Union policy on energy shall aim, in a spirit of solidarity between member states, to ensure the functioning of this internal market, to ensure security of supply, and to promote energy efficiency and energy savings, developing new and renewable forms of energy, promoting the interconnection of energy networks in order to improve the environment and to ensure sustainability. And this is because energy and climate are ultimately the two sides of the same coin. In this context, the European Green Deal has been a turning point for the EU's energy policy, putting the European Union at the forefront in the race towards climate neutrality. And we all know that in recent years, the European Union has faced a series of unprecedented challenges, many of which were directly tied to the energy industry. We have witnessed competition from other regions, geopolitical crises, armed conflicts on European territory, shocking events in a continent that has long been driven by the ideals of peace, of social progress and well-being. And we also have had to contend with emergencies, such as the global health crisis, COVID, or other circumstances which have severely impacted the economic, social, and financial well-being of our citizens. The European Union has responded to these challenges without delay, always relying on law as the central instrument of its regulatory action. You know that more recently the Letta report has highlighted the significance of energy for Europe's future, emphasizing it as a cornerstone of our development strategy. But also Mario Draghi, in his recent report, highlights the importance of a decarbonized industrial sector, and he also indicates the steps needed to achieve this transformation. The incoming European Commission, which will be set up in the coming weeks, faces the daunting task of supporting the energy transition, of strengthening Europe's competitiveness, and to foster a renewed industrial effort focused on decarbonization. Industrial policy and decarbonization are essential elements for our future strategy. And as the Union moves towards decarbonizing its economy and promoting renewable energy sources, effective regulation is critical to ensure that this process is successful, it is fair, and it is efficient. This transition is not only a technological and economic challenge, but it is a unique opportunity to strengthen the European Union. The rule of law, legal certainty, together with the current priority of simplification, will play a crucial role to enhance the competitiveness and social cohesion of the European Union and of shaping its relations in the current international landscape. An environment of trust is indispensable for the proper functioning of the internal market, to attract investments and to promote innovation. Let me conclude congratulating EFELA's role in contributing to shape energy law in Europe. Let me also congratulate its president, Vicente López Ibor Mayor, for his leadership and for his great enthusiasm in this task. Thank you for your attention. I encourage you at this time of change, with so many challenges, but also with so many hopes ahead, to continue your efforts to contribute to the objective of developing a more consistent and a more coherent regulatory approach to energy law in Europe. Thank you very much.
So thank you, everyone. I hope you found this conference useful and thought-provoking, and see you all at the next conference, maybe in Budapest. And now we have the lunch.